Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan and it's not Spawn here. It is day 36 of my comic review video day calendar, and this time we're going to go to a series that I've been excited to tackle at some point this year. It's Grant Morrison's JLA, and today we're going to look at issue number 28. Kind of a random choice. I've never read all of this. I've read a little bit of this series here and there. I've been saying that for a lot of things I own, but I haven't read much of JLA outside of Tower of Babel. This is the beginning of a 4-issue arc, and it looked odd and interesting. I was like, the Justice League versus like a genie with a lamp? Okay. That seems like weird Grant Morrison wildness. Let's take a look at that. And it doesn't disappoint. This is as wacky as it looks on the cover and as you would expect from Morrison. And as usual from this writer, we've got just matchless imagination. That is the only way I know how to review a Grant Morrison book. It's nuts. It's unpredictable. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that you can't imagine one man throws all into one pot. And while it's doing a lot of crazy golden age absurd comic book shenanigans, it also can get pretty disturbing in places and does not read like a kid's comic. He is so good at walking the line between old school fun escapist comic fiction and telling stories that are real character driven and about something, and finding that juxtaposition between silly superhero stuff where he's not above the goofiness of superhero comics, but the balance of that and bordering on almost horror, where this stuff can get scary and scarier because, and more off-putting, because he lulls you into a false sense of security with all the escapist fun you're having. And then the other shoe drops and something horrifying happens to somebody. So the premise here, oh, and by the way, this is drawn by Howard Porter, who did the whole Morrison run of JLA, or at least I think, or at least he starts this book with Morrison and works on it for at least the first 3 years. I don't remember how long JLA goes, or if anybody writes on it after Morrison. I'm pretty sure this series is at least is over 100 issues. But anyway, the premise here is the Justice League know that a crisis of sorts is coming. That's not mentioned in the book by name as a crisis, but it falls under that category. The story arc is called Crisis Times 5, and at first I look at this and I'm assuming that it's going to be your standard crisis in the sense that you'll have universes converging or multiple worlds in the multiverse will be at stake. It is sort of multiversal, but not the way you might think. So in dealing with, and it's clever that the word crisis is used here. In using the word crisis, instead of dealing with different dimensions in the multiverse, we're dealing with the 5th dimension, and that's why it's Crisis Times 5. So our man, who comes from the far, far, far-flung future, a robot version of our man, who apparently has some of the DNA of the original Our Man from the original Justice Society, keeps telling the Justice League about things that are going to happen just a little bit in the future. And he's a little bit like the Painter character in the first season of Heroes. He knows some bad things are going to happen, but he can't read everything. And when it comes to Mixelplix race, the people from the 5th dimension, it's cloudy, but he knows something horrible is about to happen, and he knows for sure that it's about them. And so he's able to give Superman and the Justice League a heads up. Hey, some more malevolent characters from the 5th dimension that are not just, as Superman says, about mischief, but are about but are actually, horrifying and want to mess up the world, not just mess around with it, that want to take over or rule us or something. They're coming. and we're going to have to find some way to get ready for that. And of course, they come earlier, maybe a little bit than expected, and there is no preparing for them. And so they're kind of looking for clues as to how exactly this is going to manifest, and we learn that some of Mxyzptlk's race are responsible for myths. And it's Morrison loves this kind of stuff. He likes going to ancient mythology, different sorts of mythology, and finding clever ways to literalize these things. Pardon me, and have real world explanations, or at least in the fiction, real world explanations for the fictions, and there's a lot more truth in them than mythology. And so the idea is some of Mxyzptlk's race are like genies in lamps, and but they're not just in lamps, they're sometimes in more modern things. And in this case, we're going to have one that is in a fountain pen, which is a lot of fun. The kinds of things that only the mind of Grant Morrison are going to come up with. It's absurd, but you buy it within the context of what you're reading. And I should mention, as I'm scrolling through pages here, that we get some early signs that something is amiss, and that and that the laws of physics themselves are changing, because the characters of the fifth dimension are able to do that. And one of the things that makes this whole setup really terrifying for the Justice League is that the Spectre of all characters has been trapped by one of them, and that's so that when they show up, the Spectre can't stop them, because he's one of the few people in the DC universe that would be able to stop an omnipotent imp on like a Q level, to put things in Star Trek terms. And Morrison's writing, I think, can sometimes be a little bit confusing and off-putting on a first read. He likes to kind of jump around a little bit, and I don't always, he'll have a real good setup where I fully understand the premise of the story, and then we'll start jumping to characters that I'm not familiar with, and we'll start getting to the weird kind of big ideas. And we'll jump away from the heroes that we're familiar with and that kind of ground us into the story. And if you're patient, it'll all come together. But if you're not, you'll feel lost. And I find, and I'm not just talking about this one issue, I have this with Morrison a lot, and I had it here too, and in just these 22 pages, without reading the rest of the story, where we go to the Spectre, and I'm like, I don't know why we're dealing with the Spectre right now. It becomes evident by the end of that second page with that. But then we jump to yet another character that was not involved before, and I don't know why we're looking at what we're looking at. And it took me a second read to really put a lot of this together. And again, even without reading the rest of the story yet, I have a much, much clearer understanding of what's going on. So I would suggest with Morrison, especially with this more out there stuff, especially if you're looking at issues in multiversity and the trippier stuff in Morrison's Batman, and, et cetera, et cetera, give these things another read, at least arc by arc, and you'll usually you'll be glad that you did that, I think. But anyway, so we jump over to a character that I had never heard of before, and this is such a fascinating idea, and probably the most interesting thing in this issue. We have a character named Triumph, and no, not the insult comic dog, but you have a former Justice Leaguer, I should say, who is just crap out of luck. Everything he does goes to pot, and it's not his fault. But because the world has never coalesced to his will, and he always gets the short end of the stick, he ends up making the wrong choice here and does something kind of befitting of a supervillain. So, but you sympathize with him because he's brought to his wit's end. So he has an ironic name. He's Triumph, but he's never experienced a triumph, and I like that. And so the idea is, he was thrown into the future at some point. He starts off with like a B-list Justice League. I don't know if it's the one from the early 90s that has Fire and Ice and Guy Gardner and those guys, but it seems like that kind of a team. And again, I never heard of this guy before. And he gets thrown into the future where characters that well, maybe it's not them, because none of those characters ever became big A-list characters, A-list superheroes the way they're described here. But anyway, he gets kidnapped by some also like BC D-list supervillains that I had also never heard of. I don't know who these guys are. And they're giving him crap because his kind has ruined them. And they're laughing at him because he is such a nobody superhero, and because all of his friends in the Justice League he was with became famous and popular and big heavy-hitting characters, and nobody knows who this guy is, and he doesn't even have his superpowers anymore. But what he does have, well, and I say he makes a mistake later. I guess he's making a mistake in the first place, because what he was trying to do was sell he just came to the wrong people who want to hurt him just because he's a superhero. And he's trying to sell relics that belong to the Justice League that was in their trophy room. And one of them is this fountain pen that will turn out to basically be a genie lamp and have one of the imps from the fifth dimension in it. And the imp is speaking to him in his mind and saying, "You're not schizophrenic, you're not crazy, I'm real, and all you have to do is say my name backwards and I can get you out of this." Morrison does such a good job of modernizing old ideas and putting them in the context of a more serious kind of story. And without just deconstructing superhero stuff too. Like this, as I said, it remains wholly escapist, while at the same time being a thing that you can really take seriously and that it challenges you on a literary level. And so this is the most disturbing part. He's being tortured by these guys. He's about to be killed. And this imp says, "Okay, this is your last chance. Say my name backwards or die." Now, I'm a little confused about what happens on the bottom of this page, because we don't actually see him say the imp's name backwards. So I'm assuming that he does that because it does come out of the fountain pen. But and he even has to explain to this guy what his name is. So it's that part of it is kind of confusing to me. But remember, Mxyzptlk's race, their names are all consonants with no vowels in between. So it's always your best guess as to how to pronounce them. But this one's name is spelled LKZ, so it's Lkz or Lkz. And he gives Triumph 3 wishes, and he is very resistant to like sell his soul to this devil. And there's even a scene where he says, "Well, I'm sure all you want is my soul, right?" And Lix says, "No, I want the world, basically. I'll take that." And this guy says, "What do I have to lose? Like I said, the world has been down on me forever, and I just want my powers back, and I just want to be a superhero again." And so his wish is, "I want to be Triumph again, and I want a better haircut." And you be the judge as to whether his kind of Quicksilver hair is a better haircut. His costume is real generic and early 90s and awful, I think on purpose. And I didn't do this before the show tonight. I should go take a look at this at some point and see where this guy comes from. I should have done that. You know what? I never do this. Let's look this guy up right now. I'm curious to see if he even has a Wikipedia article. Triumph the superhero. I'm not finding him right away. Let's see. Triumph DC Comics. There's his Wikipedia article. Okay, so he was invented in 94, and this comes out in 99. This book begins in 97, but we're 28 issues in, so we're already 99. So he's been around for 5 years, and his, check this out. I'll just put it in my comic area here. His original costume is even worse than the one we were just looking at. Created by Mark Waid and Howard Porter, which explains why. I'm glad I looked this up. That explains why he's here. because Porter is drawing this issue. He is not the Golden Age hero Captain Triumph, which is another comics or DC Comics property. I didn't realize that. His first appearance is just a cameo, which is funny. He's not even getting any panel time. In Justice League Task Force. And by the way, he and Wade worked together real early in his career, and then he came back and worked with Wade in the early 2000s on The Flash. I did read that earlier. But let's see, he's portrayed as a hot-headed, arrogant, and self-righteous individual. So he must have been on the Justice League that I was talking. Yeah, 92, Justice League Task Force 16, Justice League International. This is just post-Death of Superman. So I don't know what the Justice League team looks like after the Fire and Ice team. I assume it got mixed up a little bit, but it sounds like if Guy Gardner was kicked off that team, or the whole team was changed over, maybe he took his place, because he sounds like a Guy Gardner type. And in fact, when I first saw his face, I thought he was Guy Gardner. Obviously not looking at the silver haircut, but before that. One of Triumph's motivations, I'm reading this Wikipedia article, for becoming a superhero was his father was a low-ranking henchman for supervillains, a life that worried his mother. I like this take on this character then, because he's trying so hard not to be, it sounds like, a supervillain like his father, and then he just keeps having all this bad luck, and he can't help himself but do a villainous thing. So that's more interesting once you know a little bit about this background. He also apparently appeared in Justice League Task Force in stuff with the character the Ray, and that's the first thing that Porter drew at DC. So you'll see this pattern a lot with writers and artists in the Big Two, where they like to bring back characters they've worked on before and mix up, blend characters that they're real comfortable writing and drawing. And sometimes you'll wonder why certain random smaller characters show up in things. Very often it's because the person that's writing or drawing it has dealt with that character before. It's almost like directors recasting actors they've used in other movies before, because they just like working with them. So you've got this imp Lexus coming out. This guy's got 2 more wishes, so I guess we'll find out what he does with those in the issue after this, or not. I'm not sure, because he turns around, he says Lexus with a question mark, like something bad is about to happen, but we don't see what that is yet. And of course, I'm just reviewing this one issue, so I'm not going to know until I read more of it on my own. And then you get to the funniest and weirdest and most trippy out there thing that happens in the issue that is a wonderful cliffhanger and makes me want to keep reading, which I absolutely will at some point. But I want to read JLA cover to cover at some point, so this is just a nice little tip of my toe into this. I love this look of Huntress's face at the bottom here. So we know that the laws of physics are all messed up. And I don't know, by the way, if what happens on this last panel I'm about to show you has to do with Lexus, or if it's just a combination of these imps showing up, and if it's one of the other ones, or several at the same time. I don't know. There are, I guess there's supposed to be 5 of them. What's weird, because it's Crisis times 5, and I don't know if that's because it's the 5th dimension, or if it's because there's, I guess, or if it's because there's 5 of these. It's confusing. So there is, I'm jumping around, but let me go back to the beginning of this, because we're told that 5 receptacles exist, like the fountain pen, and like there's genie lamps and stuff. But then we're also told there are 4 elemental giants, which are the Djinn in what I think is a Middle Eastern myth that turns out to be about these 5th dimensional creatures. I don't know why there's 5 receptacles and 4 monsters or entities. I'm confused on that point. I feel like I missed something there. I don't know what's going on. I've read this twice. I don't understand that part. But anyway, so you get to the end of this, and I'm expecting the big thing on the last panel. This is the kind of thing Morrison is so good at. Whatever you think is going to be on the last page is not going to be there. It's going to be something way weirder. And I'm thinking it's going to be Triumph. He's shown up, or it's going to be this imp that Triumph got his powers from. But no, it's a bank. Yeah, it's a bank. that turned into a monster and is laughing at everyone and says the world has a new master now. I don't want to read too far into this. I don't know what Grant Morrison is saying about capitalism or money or banking or what, because just based on what we have here, it's just a bizarre image and the last thing you would expect to happen. It's hilarious. By the way, that guy at the bottom there is not Batman, as you might think. Batman's not in this comic. That is Wildcat. But sometimes if all you get is his head with his cowl, he just looks like Batman with short ears. But it's not Wildcat. But it's not Batman. It's Wildcat. And something I didn't talk about here is that you've got a lot of the original Justice Society coming together to make kind of a reunion, because weirdly a lot of what's happening here ends up being related to some of them, and so they end up coming back together, starting with Jay Garrick, who I don't know how Jay Garrick is around, but he clearly has been in the status quo for a while, and he's running around with Wally West, kind of lamenting the fact that he's getting older and he's not as fast as Wally West, and Wally is wholly sympathetic and makes him feel better about that, and it's a nice touching kind of scene. But you've also got this Hour Man, and you have their version of Green Lantern. I always forget his name. Sentinel. He's here. So this also serves as kind of a Justice Society thing. But anyway, the banking thing is hysterical. And the other thing that's interesting to note about the fact that's a giant bank, this is just a weird coincidence, but I also read that Porter, the artist here, left comics briefly in the early 2000s to be a graphic designer for banks. He went into banking. Like, this is not why that's there, but I think it's hilarious that was the case. He draws this bank that's like eating people, and then later he's going to work for banks. And that's really funny. And it's not just this bank either. There's a car with a face there. So I think, and it looks like it's even more than that. There's buildings behind him. I didn't even see that. Behind this bank that have all become sentient, scary creatures. And that just looks Looney Tunes, and I can't wait to read more of that, which I will totally do. But I have way too many of these things to keep reading, and this has been a really weird exercise for me, because it's been a lot of like reading a thing that I really want to read more of, but then I got to read a different issue the next day. But I think it's been worth it, because I'm just getting a sense of the flavor of all these things that I've never bothered with or haven't looked at enough of. So anyway, boy, this was a lot of fun to read, and really messed with my expectations quite a bit. I'm going to do another one for you tomorrow, because that's what we're doing. I'm going to be more predictable than Grant Morrison. I'm going to put out another not Spawn Year review for you tomorrow, and I don't know where I'm going to go yet. I've done a couple DC in a row, so maybe Marvel, maybe something else. I don't know yet. But anyway, thanks a bunch for watching. I hope you had fun, and I'll see you again tomorrow. I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.